Thanks for tuning in at Brackies. Hello everyone and welcome to the second tutorial in the 2D platformer course. Today we're going to be taking a look at turning this relatively boring scene into something much more exciting like this. Keep in mind that the player is still placeholder art and that the platforms here are not so pretty, so I'm probably going to change those. But I really wanted to play around with this surrealistic kind of pixel art style. I would like to do a lot of particle effects in this tutorial and look at some explosions or something to pimp things up so it doesn't get too boring, but something with lots of colors and yeah, you get the idea. Cool, so that's what we are going to be doing today. Before we go ahead and get started with this, I just quickly want to say that I have finally, because you guys have requested it so much, opened up a Brackies apparel store. So if you go to brackies.spreadshirt.net, you will be able to buy different kinds of t-shirts with the logo, also a mug if that's what you want. And also I've made some cool designs like this one, the Write Code one, and as requested, the I'm a developer design. So I might be add some more if things goes well. So please go ahead and check this out. And yeah, cool. So that aside, let's get this tutorial started. So first off, I'm going to open up the 2D assets pack, and this is something you can download from brackies.com if you go to projects and then the 2D platformer course. There will be a download button here where you can download the assets. They are of course completely free. And once we open this up, we get a bunch of different folders. This is the same pack used for the Pong tutorial course. So there's a bunch of different designs in here, and you can of course use what you want. Just check out the README because a very few amount of these things are licensed. So under the 2D platformer, we can see that I've made what is called an Tek Texture Atlas, also called a Sprite Atlas or a Sprite Map or a Sprite Sheet. It has many names, but it basically just means that you have different sprites or images in one big file. So if I open this up in the image editor, you can see that I have these 4 landscape things and then 4 different platforms in one image. And first off, it allows, because it's completely rectangular, this is 500 by 12 by 512, that means Unity will easily compress the colors so it doesn't become as big as a file. It will also make sure that it quickly loads up, and yeah, it will just overall minimize the size of your game. So it's generally good practice. Also, if you're using Photoshop, you can just directly import the Photoshop file and you can make changes directly, so it's really fun and easy to add new designs. Then I have just a simple gradient blue background, just so we don't get the boring Unity blue color. Cool, so I'm gonna go ahead and import the Photoshop versions, but you can of course follow along with the PNGs. So I'll select both Photoshop files, drag them into Unity here into the project pane and just release, and you can see them appearing. So first off, let's set up the environment Sprite Atlas, because there are a few things we need to change. Right now when we import this, there are multiple things wrong. First of which is that it's very small. It's also not very pixely, it's kind of blurred, and everything is in one image. So let's change all of this. So let's delete this and select it in the project pane, and under the texture type we still want this to be sprite, but we want to change the sprite mode to multiple. Once we've done this, let's change the pixels to units, which means how many pixels makes up one unit in Unity. And we're going to set this to 5. I find that to be quite okay for the project we're making here. Then we're going to change the filter mode, and this is really important. This basically means how Unity interprets the pixels and tries to smooth them or whatever it does. And we want this to be point, meaning that there will be no smoothing whatsoever. And that's important in pixel art because we want the edges to be very sharp. Then the max size, we could set this to 512 by 512, but it's already there, so why change it? And then we can simply leave this at compressed. If you want to go ultra small, you can do 16 bits, but then some of your colors might not be perfect. So let's just do compressed. That's going to work fine for us. Then now let's hit apply and let's open up the Sprite Editor, which is something I haven't shown you before. So click Sprite Editor. And it will open up a window here. It's usually very small, but you can just go ahead and maximize it. And this is pretty cool because Unity has what is called automatic sprite slicing. And that basically means that instead of having to drag a rectangle around every sprite we've made, consider we have maybe 100 sprites. If we're doing character animations or something like that, that can get really annoying and is very prone to errors. So instead, Unity has made a cool automatic sprite slicing system for us. And all we need to do in order to utilize this is go to the left-hand corner where it says slice. Click there. Select the type automatic because we haven't set this up in a grid like fashion. The minimum size, I think that's fine at 4. The pivot we are just going to do center by default. These are all default settings and you can change them individually after. And then the method we're going to do delete existing. So now hit slice and you can see that some rectangles appear around our platforms and around each of these elements here. Might be hard to see on camera, but I promise you that once we select them here, you can see that they're working. Actually, this one is not. So that's perfect because that means we get to go in and fix the error here. So right now it interprets these two elements as being one sprite. So what we can do to change this is we can simply take the first one here, select it and just drag it up. So that's going to be our first sprite, that's going to be our top sprite, and just make sure that this is snapped correctly, and now it is. You can also down here change the parameters to whatever you like. Actually, we could go ahead and name these in a sec, which I think we're going to do. But if you want some true precision, on your scaling, you can just type in the numbers down here. But now we want to add another sprite because right now the blue one here doesn't have a sprite assigned. So what you do is you hold down Control and you can see, and then click and drag, and you can see this green rectangle appearing. Oops, that was only to show you. I'm just gonna delete this again by hitting delete. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna hold down Control and we're gonna drag from up here all the way over here. And of course, if you've made mistakes, you can still resize this to suit your needs. And once we've done this, we can go ahead and name this. So let's start from the top here and call this background mountains. Let's do purple. Let's call this background mountains orange. This one, you guessed it, is going to be background mountains blue. And the last one here, we're just going to call it ground. Maybe just foreground, ground. I'm just going to do ground. Even though we're not going to stand on it, it is just ground. Actually, let's do foreground dirt. That just makes more sense. And then the for platforms, we're going to do platform 1. This is always really tedious, but if you don't do it, you will wish you had. So let's do platform 2. Platform 3. and platform 4. Awesome. So I probably misspelled half of these, but we're just going to say OK. So up in the right hand corner, let's select apply. Awesome. Now we can close down the Sprite Editor. And now when we open up our environment atlas here, we can see that we have all of the different sprites which we can select individually. So this is really awesome. If you just drag in the whole atlas, it will just select the first one. But we are gonna just get rid of this for now. And let's just go up to File, Save Scene, and Save Project. So to make sure that everything is working. Awesome. So let me just check the time here. So we have plenty of time left. Cool. So what we're gonna do now is, first off, I'm gonna just select the camera here and I'm gonna zoom this out a bit because I think it's just a bit too focused on the player here, and I want this to be kind of fast-paced and action-like, and that's not really nice when you almost can't see anything but the player. So let's change the size here. We're still gonna leave it in orthographic, but we're gonna zoom out by bumping up the size. So let's do something like maybe 15. It's a little extreme, but I think it's gonna work nicely for the game. So we're just gonna leave this for now, and we can always go ahead and change it. And the reason why we're leaving it in orthographic is we could change it to perspective, which would be easy when we are gonna do parallaxing, but it doesn't give us much control as to where elements are placed in the scene. So I'm gonna leave it on orthographic, and if you don't know the difference between the two, please just ignore what I said. It's not gonna be important for this course. Cool. Wow, I'm doing a lot of talking today. Now let's do some action. So first off, let's delete the ground. It doesn't look pretty. Then let's drag in one of these platforms for our character to have something to stand on. Let's just do platform 1. So drag it in here. Let's move it down. So let's center it on the X, and let's just do -5. Let's do -5.5 on the Y, and let's go ahead and add a box collider to this. So hit Add Component, Physics 2D, and then Box Collider 2D. And it should automatically set things up. And the reason why we're just adding a box collider is we are probably never going to collide with the root here. If you are making a game where you could collide with the pillar itself, then I would recommend going and add component physics 2D and then polygon collider, where you can more accurately change the collision. But for now, we're going to stick with the box collider 2D. Awesome. So that was the first platform. Let's drag some more in here. Let's do platform 2. Same procedure. So let's do 0x and then -5.5 to make sure that these are positioned exactly the same here, and we can drag them to make sure that they are aligned on the x-axis too. By the way, when dragging and holding down shift, you will constrain the dragging to one axis. So right now I'm not holding down shift, and right now I am. That's just a nifty little trick. So cool. There. That looks nice. And that's... let's add a box collider to this also. So add component physics 2D box collider 2D. Let's go ahead and just add the last platforms also. So let's do platform 3. And of course, this is something you can position as you want. You can use them however you like. I just wanted to provide some basic assets, though this one is not the one I'm the most proud of, I must say. They will do the job. So let's drag it in here and just position it so it works. It's fine. A little bit of an overlap is better than a bit of a gap, because that leaves just ugly anti-aliasing and such. And then the last platform 4. Actually, let's add a box collider to that one also. There, and a box collider to platform 4 while we are at it. Yeah, and let's position this at 0 and -5.5. And let's just drag it out to the right. Zoom in here so we can get this right. And there's going to be just fine for now. Cool, so now we have 4 platforms for our characters to stand on, and now when we play the game, you can see that he is indeed standing on these. You will also notice that they are currently floating. You can get rid of this by moving up the camera. You could do that by setting the target of the camera to an empty game object on the player that is higher than the player himself. So maybe with a Y value of like +3. And that way we will make sure that the camera is also always raised a little higher than the exact center. But that's not something we're going to do. Instead, we're going to conceal this by having a foreground element in front of this, as you can see on the picture here. So that's going to work just fine. Cool. So let's continue. Now let's add some blue background here. So let's drag in the blue background image. Actually, all of the settings here we can pretty much just leave as is. That they're going to work just fine. So let's drag this under the main camera. And let's see how this is positioned. So let's make it sure it's 0, 0, 0. Let's also make sure that the scale is 10 and 10. Actually, let's do maybe 12 on the X just to make sure that we're not getting any weird clipping. But right now we're not seeing anything, and that's because it's directly on top of the camera. So let's just move this back a bit. Actually, let's just move it completely out of the way into the distance here, and then go back into 2D view. And what we can do is we can lock this layer, meaning that we will not be constantly selecting it, because that can really be a pain. So let's just lock this by going up here to layer. Let's hit add layer and make a background layer here. So let's do background. Then select the object again and select the background layer. And then up here under layers, you can see that we have a layer called background. You can lock that, or you can just lock the sorting layer, but I'm gonna lock the background layer up here. So just click the lock, and now when we deselect it, we're not gonna be able to select it, so we can do stuff like box dragging and all of that awesome stuff. So we can really focus on making the game fun instead of, yeah, you know, selecting the background and all that kind of stuff being really annoying. Awesome. So now when we hit play, we can see that the background will follow us around, and this is going to be just fine because, I mean, it's just a simple gradient. You will notice that we have a bit of clipping here where the sprite ends. So let's just make sure to widen it a bit further, maybe do 15. That's pretty close to right screen ratio, and yeah, it's just much better. So just go a bit overboard with that, and it's not going to disturb you. Cool. So now let's drag some more elements into the scene. Let's do a actually let's do a foreground now. Let's do the foreground element here, the foreground dirt. Let's drag this in, and this is not going to need a collider, but let's center it on the X, and let's just drag it down on the Y here until it fits. And one thing you probably want to do is you want to sort these things in sorting layers. So let's select all the platforms, and actually I just want them to be on the default layer, but I can see that the default layer is beneath everything else. So let's go ahead and edit the sorting layers, and we can do this by just hitting add sorting layer. It will bring up the sorting layers, and let's just drag the default here above the background but under the player, because we pretty much always want the player to be on top. So yeah, let's just arrange it like that. So now everything by default will be above the background but beneath the player in the foreground, and that's awesome. So all of the platforms here, we can just leave them at default. But our foreground dirt, let's make sure to select foreground for that. So when we drag it over our player, you can see that he will be hidden behind. Awesome. Maybe we should drag this down. I don't know. Let's see how this looks in the game view. This looks pretty interesting. Not too shabby. Maybe drag it down just a bit. Like this. Yeah, that's pretty nice. I really want to leave some room for just the blue sky and maybe even some clouds in the future, but that's something we're going to mess around with. Awesome, so now let's do some background mountains. Please do remember that right now when we are playing, you will notice that the foreground and the platforms scroll at the exact same speed. This is because we haven't implemented what is called parallaxing, which is probably what we're gonna do in the next tutorial. I found a really cool way to do parallaxing without using a perspective camera, simply by scripting in some position, and it's gonna be really fun. It really adds depth to the scene, so that's for next time. Cool, so let's go ahead and drag in some background elements, shall we? So let's select the, let's do the purple one, maybe? Or, yeah, that's one, this one is going to be more into the distance. So let's do the purple one, drag it in here. Oops, my phone's going off. Just a sec, I'm going to pause the video here and be back. Oh wow, okay, cool, so I'm back. I'm sorry about that, that was not so professional. But what we're gonna do now is we're gonna change the sorting layer to background. And then of course it will be behind our blue background. So let's make sure to select our blue background and change that sorting layer to also background. And then the ordering layer to something like minus just 1000. Because we are never going to have anything behind the blue background here. So now the background mountain's purple. Let's select this and center it in the X. And let's do a Y of, ooh, I don't know. Let's see what looks great in game here. So let's drag this down maybe. That's actually not too bad with it just barely appearing above. Yeah, else it's gonna cover too much. I don't want it like right where the platforms begin, because then they're gonna be overlapping and it confuses the player. So something like this looks pretty nice. Especially when we get that parallaxing effect, this is gonna be really awesome. So I quite like this. Maybe just move it up just a tad. So we ended up with about -7 on the Y, and that's gonna do just fine. I've made sure to make both the dirt and the background mountains pretty long, so you can go ahead and just choose the part that fits best. Of course, when we implement the parallaxing, we do need them to be quite long, and we might even need them to do some repeating and some instantiation, but that's something we're going to look at. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's first off import another mountain layer. So let's do the blue background here. I think I'm just gonna exclude the other ones here though, or the orange one, though it is pretty cool. No, I'm gonna exclude it for now. So let's try the blue background, drag that in here. And as you can see, I've added a bit of a blur to this. You might like, you might not like. I think it's okay because that makes it just easier for the eye to focus on the foreground. So I thought it was a little necessary. So let's again put this in the background and let's do the ordering layer -1. So it will be behind our purple mountains. And for this we can just maybe offset it a bit in some direction. We could also invert the scale on the X. So let's do -1 on the X, and that will maybe hide the effect a bit, and then at the same time offset it. So now, as you can see, it will be, it's not so apparent that it's basically the same layer. Of course, you can go ahead and change this in Photoshop and move around pixels and stuff to hide this. I'm not going to go so in depth because this is, again, just a tutorial, but feel free to play around with anything and alter it the way you like it to. So let's just move this down just a bit. And I think we have something that looks pretty nice here. I mean, we have plenty of room for gameplay elements, both going up or down. And yeah, so you can of course play around with these platforms. And right now, if we fall, we will fall behind the foreground here. So maybe we can make some dying mechanics. If you fall from a platform, they don't need to be so close as I've made made them here. You can of course drag them out and make some actual platforming instead of just walking on one surface. So that's actually something I'm gonna do right now. So I'm just gonna move these up here just so we have a tiny game to play there. Awesome. So that was it for this tutorial. What was this? Okay, so this was a long one. Oh, wow, time flies when you're doing graphics. You can really get caught up in it. But yeah, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.